My name is Daniel Hayes, and though I am not the central figure of this story, I am its witness, its heartbeat, and in some quiet way, its keeper. I had once thought stories of love were only worthy of fairy tales, but life has a way of crafting its own narratives, both messy and luminous. The story I want to share with you belongs to a young woman. Her name is Claire Thompson. She lived in New York City, spirited and clever, though at times too proud for her own welfare. I work really hard to make videos for you all, so please subscribe to my channel and like this video. Also, make sure to tell me your name and where you are watching this story from. Let's start the story. Claire was engaged when I first met her. But to call it a simple engagement would be to reduce a complex blend of emotions to a single word. She wore her engagement like a dress she wasn't sure fit her, half delighted, half embarrassed, and altogether concealed. She did not flaunt her fiancé, not because he lacked value, but because she thought she would be ridiculed for loving a man so plain in a city that measured worth in status and sheen. Her fiancé was Nathan Reed. Nathan worked as an English teacher in a small community high school in Queens. He was gentle, deeply ethical, and unashamed of the way he lived. But to the people in Claire's world, her university friends, her social circle in Manhattan cafes and rooftop lounges, Nathan seemed ordinary. Claire felt this judgment pressed upon her from every gathering and dinner, and as a consequence, she began hiding Nathan in shadows, speaking of him vaguely and sometimes not at all. I watched this with the unease of someone seeing truth veiled, because Nathan adored her absolutely. He never protested Claire's hesitations, even when she downplayed his presence. He seemed to understand her pride, her struggle with the city's cold gazes. But as with all truths hidden, life eventually set the stage for revelation. What unfolded, dear listener, was a season where the brilliance of those she thought were her closest friends would dim, and the man she thought was dim would instead become her light. Claire grew up in Boston before moving to New York for her literature degree. From the very beginning, she had been sharp, disciplined, and impatient for greatness. She belonged to a circle of friends at the university, most of whom later slipped into the luminous corporate circuits of Manhattan, PR firms, publishing houses, and startups with glass walls glittering high above the Hudson. Their conversations revolved around promotions, rooftop brunches, designer labels, and the latest scandal in publishing. Nathan, by contrast, was an English teacher who quoted Whitman freely, bought second-hand books with broken spines, and cooked dinner with more love than culinary skill. His world was smaller but warmer. For Claire, that warmth was both a comfort and a silent embarrassment. She never stopped loving Nathan, but she concealed that love in public as though her heart was some fragile contraband. When her friends, like Maya and Oliver, asked about her personal life, she spoke evasively. "There's someone," she'd say, or "it's complicated." When pressed, she downplayed Nathan's profession, almost whispering it, afraid to admit she was engaged to a man without money, without status, without Manhattan polish. Nathan never confronted her. He once told me quietly, "Love doesn't demand a stage. If she needs time, I'll wait." There was no bitterness in his tone, only patience, as if his love was a river that could cut through stone given years. But patience, too, is tested. And so came the time where masks could not hold. It began subtly. An investment venture in which Claire's friends had coaxed her to participate turned sour, draining much of her savings. Simultaneously, the publishing house where she worked as an assistant editor faced layoffs, and her name was among those slipped gently into white envelopes. The friends who had once filled her weekends with laughter and glasses of wine seemed to evaporate when she could no longer host parties or afford fashionable clothes. Calls dwindled, invitations disappeared, and texting threads grew silent. Even Maya, closest of all, began to respond with delightfully crafted excuses, too busy, caught in meetings, leaving town for the weekend. For weeks Claire sat in her small Brooklyn apartment in a paralysis of pride, unwilling to tell Nathan what had happened. Shame gnawed at her. How could she admit to being unemployed, to losing the spotlight she once paraded with? But Nathan found out anyway. He noticed her hesitation at dinner when reaching for the check, her absent eyes when he spoke of literature, her exhaustion not from labor but from worry. He did not demand an explanation. Instead, he filled the silence with kindness. He stocked her fridge, kept her company, and offered her the quiet sense of being seen without being judged. But Claire's pride erupted cruelly one night. "You don't understand my world, Nathan," she shouted after weeks of bottled frustration. "You're comfortable with your chalkboards and lesson plans, but she choked on her words. "I don't want to be pitted." Nathan simply looked at her, and though his face stung with hurt, his voice was steady. "Claire, I don't pity you. I love you. There's a difference." That night Claire wept. And for the first time, she let herself fall, without pretense, without armor, into his arms. It was the collapse of her constructed self, but also the beginning of her recognition. The weeks that followed were humbling. Nathan accompanied her to job interviews, not intruding, but silently cheering at her side. When she doubted herself, he reminded her of the first stories she had written in college, the way she had lit up when reading Baldwin and Morrison. He reminded her not of failure but of her essence. Slowly, Claire began to see the thinness of the social veil she had clung to. The friends who had abandoned her revealed themselves as companions of circumstance, not of heart. And Nathan, the man she had hidden from their judgment, proved unshakably loyal. There was one Saturday afternoon in Central Park when Claire truly understood. They sat beneath an elm tree, the world noisy around them, families with balloons, joggers, frisbees cutting the air. She looked at Nathan, who was reading from a tattered copy of Leaves of Grass, his lips whispering fragments of poetry. And it struck her, with the gentleness of revelation, this was love. Not the shimmering illusion her friends demanded, but the quiet certainty that when the world receded, one person stayed. For the first time, she said it without hesitation, "You are my home, Nathan." As weeks turned into months, Claire began to notice just how easily people disappeared when you lost the sheen of success. Invitations to brunches in Soho ceased altogether. Instagram pictures of her former friends showed them laughing in restaurants lit like art galleries, traveling to Lisbon and Tokyo, yet when Claire messaged even out of simple courtesy, they often left her unread. Her heart twisted most when Maya, the one friend she had believed immovable, hosted a birthday dinner without her. Claire stumbled upon the pictures online, Maya in a red dress, surrounded by faces both familiar and new. There was no text, no phone call, no invitation. For Claire, it was less a wound and more a slow, dull tearing from belonging into exile. For several nights she wandered Manhattan streets alone, as though hoping the city lights would embrace her the way people once did. But each glittering avenue only reminded her of what she could no longer touch. And still, there was Nathan. Always Nathan. Waiting patiently at her apartment to cook her soup, to ask her about her day though she had none of value to report. It was then Claire realized what a paradox her life had become. She had hidden Nathan out of fear that her friends would dismiss him, and yet those same friends had vanished without hesitation. Nathan, the one she had underestimated, remained at her side steadfast and real. There was one incident that altered the way Claire saw Nathan, an incident seemingly small and ordinary, yet unforgettable. One evening they had gone grocery shopping at a tiny store near Claire's neighborhood. At the counter an elderly woman struggled to pay for her items, fumbling through a nearly empty wallet with trembling hands. Other customers grew impatient, annoyed by the delay. Nathan, without hesitation, stepped forward and covered her remaining bill. The woman looked at him with watery eyes. "You're kind, son." Nathan smiled. "Not kind, just human." The words were simple, but they stayed with Claire. It was not only the act itself but the genuine, unceremonious way Nathan did it. No pause, no thought of whether someone was watching. He lived in a state of quiet kindness, as though decency was not effort but instinct. Walking home that night, Claire realized how different Nathan's inner world was from the pretentious displays of generosity among her friends, lavish gifts, high-profile donations, always documented on social media for recognition. Nathan's goodness was wordless, invisible to all but the one standing beside him. And Claire began to ask herself, why had I ever been ashamed of him? Despite Nathan's constant presence, Claire's pride was not so easily dismantled. There were still moments she resisted leaning on him, afraid dependency would mean failure. One rainy evening she sat on her apartment floor surrounded by unpaid bills, her chest tightening with panic. Nathan found her there, papers scattered, tears streaking down her face. "Let me help," he said softly. "I can't keep leaning on you," she whispered through clenched teeth. "I lost everything. My job, my friends. I don't even know who I am anymore. What's left?" Nathan knelt beside her, lifting her chin so she couldn't look away. "What's left," he said, "is you. That's always enough." His words sliced through her defenses. For years she had built an identity on external validation, titles, circles, appearances. Now stripped of them, she felt raw and bare. And yet, in Nathan's eyes, she saw herself reflected without distortion, not the failed assistant editor, not the rejected friend, but simply Claire. That night, she allowed herself to collapse completely, every ounce of pride dissolving into sobs against his chest. Nathan held her without asking anything in return. It was a breaking point, but also the seed of rebirth. Claire began to rebuild herself, not outwardly at first, but inwardly. She started writing again, returning to short stories she had abandoned in college. Nathan encouraged her, reading her drafts with the same attentiveness he gave his students' essays. There was one story about a woman who lived among glass houses, afraid of her neighbors seeing her flaws. Nathan loved it deeply. "This is your best work," he said. "You've put your truth on the page." Claire had never understood before how important it was to be seen, not only in appearance, but in essence. Nathan did not inflate her ego, he nurtured her authenticity. And slowly, she began to see love differently, not as an ornament or display, but as a partnership of true vision. She no longer flinched when asked about her relationship. One afternoon, when a distant acquaintance bumped into her at a cafe and casually asked if she was seeing anyone, Claire answered with unapologetic clarity, "Yes. I'm engaged. His name is Nathan, and he's the best person I know." It was the first time she said it without hesitation, and it felt like freedom. But the world she had once idolized was not done whispering at her doorstep. Maya returned after months of silence, reaching out with a casual invitation, a dinner in Soho, just like old times. Claire hesitated. The younger version of herself would have gone without question, eager to reclaim belonging. But now she saw the hollowness that shimmered beneath. Still, curiosity compelled her, and Nathan, though skeptical, encouraged her gently. "Sometimes you have to face what you've outgrown to realize you're truly past it." At the dinner, Claire found herself surrounded by glitter again, perfumed laughter, expensive wine, the casual brags disguised as conversations. Maya smiled brightly, but there was a distance between them, as though friendship could be reignited by convenience alone. When asked about her current life, Claire spoke honestly, about job hunting, about writing stories, about Nathan. Some at the table gave polite smiles, others exchanged subtle glances. The judgments she had once feared were still there, unspoken yet loud. But for the first time, Claire felt no sting. She realized she didn't need their approval. Her worth was no longer something they had the power to define. Leaving the restaurant, Claire felt lighter than she ever had, as though she had put down a burden she didn't realize she was carrying. Over the next few months, Claire found freelance work editing manuscripts for independent writers. It was not prestigious, nor particularly lucrative, but it was fulfilling. For the first time she worked not for applause, but for the craft she loved. One evening in their modest Brooklyn kitchen, Nathan poured her a glass of wine and said, "You know, when you stopped hiding us, you didn't just choose me, you chose yourself." Claire smiled, touching his hand. "And I think I finally understand what love is, Nathan. It's not about what the world admires. It's about who holds you steady when the world disappears." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "Then we've both chosen right." Spring came to New York in soft green waves, and with it, Claire discovered that renewal was not merely seasonal, but personal. She had shed her past illusions and stepped into a life painted in quieter, deeper colors. Where she once chased applause, she now sought authenticity. Where she once feared judgment, she now treasured sincerity. Her freelance editing blossomed slowly. Word spread within small writers' groups that she was not only skilled but also compassionate, a rare editor who nurtured voices instead of silencing them. Soon, she was working with first-time authors, immigrant storytellers, and self-published poets. The pay was modest, but the gratitude she received was immense. Each project reinforced that her worth was not tethered to wealth or prestige, but to the impact she created. For the first time, Claire felt in control of her destiny. Nathan continued teaching, pouring himself into his students with the same patience and encouragement he had given Claire. He invited her occasionally to his classroom, where she watched him turn the dull mechanics of grammar into sparks of curiosity. One day, as she quietly observed from the back of the room, Claire thought, "This man is more valuable to the world than any CEO in a skyscraper." Although Claire and Nathan had been engaged for over a year, there had never been a formal proposal that felt truly theirs. The initial engagement had been rushed, half-shadowed by her embarrassment, more a quiet promise than a celebration. One evening, Nathan led Claire to the Brooklyn Bridge at twilight. Tourists bustled around, lights flickered across Manhattan's skyline, but Nathan seemed untouched by the noise. "I know we already promised ourselves to one another," he began, his voice calm but trembling slightly, "but I want to ask you, here and now, when you are no longer hiding, when we are both standing in the open." He knelt down with nothing but a simple silver band. No spectacle, no crowd, just the wind and river as witnesses. Claire felt her breath shatter, not because of surprise, but because of the deep truth in the moment. "Will you marry me, Claire?" Not in shadows, not in pretense, but in the open daylight of our lives. She knelt beside him before answering, tears running freely. "Yes, Nathan. 1,000 times, yes. I've hidden too long. You are everything real in my life. And I will never hide again." The city roared around them, but for the two of them, the world fell still. They chose to marry in autumn. The ceremony was not in a cathedral or luxurious hotel but in a small botanical garden in Queens, filled with golden leaves and quiet paths. Claire's parents came from Boston, bewildered at first by the simple preparations. But when they saw the way Nathan looked at her, steady, unwavering, as though she were the only person existing, they understood. Few of her old Manhattan friends attended, many had drifted away permanently. Maya appeared at the reception, arriving late, offering a half-hearted smile. Yet, to Claire's surprise, her heart no longer ached for belonging. She realized she did not crave their presence, nor resent their absence. She was free. As they exchanged vows, Nathan whispered, "I saw you even when you couldn't see yourself. And I always will." Claire replied, "And I will never again measure love by the world's standards, but only by the truth of your hand in mine." When they kissed, it was not the beginning of a life together, but the recognition that they had already lived it, through storms, through silence, through undeniable loyalty. Marriage did not turn life into perfection. There were bills, long commutes, and days when exhaustion weighed heavy. But their bond transformed those struggles into shared burdens. Nathan continued teaching, and Claire eventually founded her own small literary consultancy, pairing young writers with editors, building a community far away from the pretentious halls she once longed to enter. There were days when her past flickered back, an email from Maya asking to catch up sometime, or passing by the glitter of Manhattan parties she no longer attended. But Claire learned to look at them with empathy rather than longing. She realized many of her old friends were still lost inside the very illusions she had broken free from. One winter night, sitting on their couch with Nathan's head on her lap, Claire whispered, "The life we've built is quiet. But it's honest. And it's enough." Nathan smiled in his half-asleep state. "It's more than enough." Years later, as Claire stood in a lecture hall giving a talk to young women about resilience in literature and life, she recounted her journey. Not in detail, not exposing scars unnecessarily, but with the wisdom scars provide. "I once thought love was about appearances," she told the audience. "I thought worth was external, measured by circles of admiration. But worth, true worth, is who stays in your corner when the lights go out. It's who believes in your voice when you've forgotten you have one." In that moment, Claire was no longer the girl who hid her fiancé, nor the woman abandoned by friends in crisis. She was someone reborn, defined not by pride or society, but by the clarity of love tested and proven. And so, dear listener, this is where Claire Thompson's story concludes, or rather, where it continues beyond the page. I, Daniel Hayes, remember watching it unfold like seasons shifting, each change unhurried, but inevitable. I tell her story not because it is extraordinary in outward events, but because it uncovers an extraordinary truth that too few dare to embrace, that the world's applause is fleeting, but the hand that steadies you in silence is eternal. Claire once concealed her heart, ashamed of loving a man too simple for her social circle's standards. But when her glittering world collapsed, it was that same man, Nathan Reed, who held her life upright. And in choosing him wholeheartedly, she discovered not only the worth of love, but the worth of herself.